In the quiet suburban streets of Maplewood Heights, where freshly mowed lawns lined perfectly symmetrical houses and neighbors waved politely to one another, a storm was quietly brewing. On the surface, life seemed idyllic. But beneath the manicured gardens and trimmed hedges, tensions simmered. And at the center of this escalating suburban warfare was Karen Thompson. Karen wasn't your average concerned neighbor. She was the kind who wielded the HOA rules like a sword, ready to strike anyone who dared to deviate from her idea of perfection. She had the uncanny ability to find the tiniest infraction and turn it into a neighborhood crisis. For months, the residents of Maplewood Heights had lived in quiet anxiety, tiptoeing around her ever-watchful eyes. Lawns had to be trimmed to an exact height. Mailboxes had to match the HOA-approved color. Holiday decorations were a minefield. Even one tiny red bough could spark a complaint. But no one felt the full force of Karen's wrath more than Mark Evans, a longtime homeowner on Oakridge Lane. Mark wasn't reckless, he wasn't careless. He simply believed that a home should feel lived in, not like a showroom for perfection. His mailbox had a cheerful blue hue. His garden was colorful, wild in places, a testament to flowers growing freely in the summer sun. And yes, he had a collection of quirky lawn ornaments, each one a reflection of his sense of humor and personality. It started small. Karen spotted his new flamingo collection and filed a complaint with the HOA. A $50 fine arrived in the mail, along with a threatening letter demanding immediate removal. Mark paid it, thinking it would be a one-off. But the fines kept coming. Next, it was the hedge that grew an inch too tall. Then it was a tiny welcome flag hanging by his door. Each fine was small, but each felt personal, a calculated harassment from someone who took pleasure in wielding rules against her neighbors. Mark tried to reason with the HOA, explaining that the fines were excessive, that his property wasn't harming anyone, and that their obsession with minor infractions was creating tension in the community. But his complaints fell on deaf ears. The HOA, emboldened by Karen's reports, escalated matters, sending weekly notices and threatening larger penalties. The small fines had grown into hundreds of dollars in unpaid fees, and the stress was beginning to wear on Mark. He watched as other neighbors, once vibrant and expressive, slowly dulled their creativity, trimming flowers, repainting mailboxes, and quietly obeying every absurd rule. Maplewood Heights was losing its character, and Mark refused to let his home fall victim to this escalating tyranny. He began documenting everything: the letters, the notices, and the ridiculous fines. And as the mountain of paperwork grew, so did his determination to fight back. Not with anger or confrontation, but with a plan that would capture the entire neighborhood's attention. Then came the idea. At first, it seemed ridiculous, almost cartoonish. Mark had seen inflatable decorations at a friend's party store. Gigantic, whimsical, and utterly impossible to ignore. An idea sparked in his mind. An inflatable monster, massive in size, placed strategically in his front yard. But not just any placement. The inflatable would face Karen's house, towering above the street, impossible to miss. Its eyes would follow the driveway, its claws raised in a permanent gesture of menacing cheer. It would be absurd, comical, and pointed, a visual statement that he would no longer be bullied by petty fines. The preparation took weeks. Mark measured every inch of his yard, ensuring the inflatable would stand perfectly upright without interfering with neighbors who weren't involved in this escalating feud. He studied the wind patterns, ensuring that the monster would not topple over on a windy day. He even sourced a remote-controlled lighting system, allowing the monster's eyes to glow eerily at night, adding a theatrical edge to his rebellion. Meanwhile, he kept his plan secret, sharing only vague hints with a few trusted friends. The suspense became part of the strategy. If Karen suspected even a hint of what was coming, she might try to stop it before the unveiling. Finally, the day arrived. The inflatable monster was delivered in a massive, crumpled bundle, its colorful body almost comical in its deflated state. Mark and a few friends spent hours inflating it, securing ropes and stakes, and adjusting its posture. The monster grew taller than Mark's two-story house, its monstrous grin and oversized claws dominating the yard. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Oakridge Lane. The final touch was the strategic positioning, perfectly aligned so that the monster's gaze pointed directly toward Karen's window. Mark stepped back and surveyed the scene. For months, he had endured fines, harassment, and relentless pressure to conform. This was no longer just about a mailbox or a hedge. It was about reclaiming his home, his freedom, and his sense of humor. The monster was more than an inflatable. It was a symbol, a declaration, a stand against the absurdity of an overreaching HOA and a single relentless neighbor who had weaponized the rules against him. As darkness fell, Mark took one last look at the towering figure in his yard. He knew what was coming next. The inevitable calls, the furious HOA letters, and, of course, Karen herself, who would surely be the first to react. But in that moment, with the monster looming and his resolve stronger than ever, Mark felt a thrill he hadn't felt in months. This was the beginning of a suburban showdown that would soon capture the attention of neighbors, the HOA, and eventually, the entire internet. And just like that, Oak Ridge Lane went from quiet suburban street to the epicenter of a brewing viral storm, all because one man dared to face the absurdity of his HOA with a giant inflatable monster. The morning sunlight spilled across Oak Ridge Lane, catching on freshly trimmed lawns, shining windows, and perfectly maintained sidewalks. To anyone driving through Maplewood Heights, it might have seemed like any other serene suburban morning. But for Karen Thompson, the world had shifted in an instant. From her kitchen window, she saw it. The massive inflatable monster towering over Mark Evans' yard, its grotesque grin and outstretched claws pointing directly at her house. Her coffee went cold in her hand as her eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't just the size of the inflatable that startled her. It was the audacity, the clear message that she was being watched and mocked, her every action scrutinized and responded to with theatrical defiance. The monster's glowing eyes seemed to follow her every move, a silent accusation that Karen's petty tyranny had met its match. She fumed, pacing back and forth, flipping through the stack of fines she had filed over the past months. Every minor complaint now felt insignificant in the shadow of this ridiculous yet menacing figure. Within minutes, the neighborhood began to stir. Neighbors poked their heads out of windows, cameras already in hand. Some laughed, some gasped, some whispered in disbelief, pointing and recording as the inflatable loomed above Mark's front yard. The monster, inflated to perfection, had a presence that couldn't be ignored, and the internet would not be far behind. Within hours, clips began circulating on social media. Cell phones captured its enormous frame, the way its claws seemed to reach out, the way its glowing eyes followed the driveway, and the undeniable symbolism. A monster staring down the self-appointed neighborhood police. As the videos went live, comments poured in. This is peak suburban drama. Karen is officially haunted by a monster. HOA tyranny meets viral justice. The story began spreading like wildfire, far beyond Maplewood Heights. By midday, local news outlets had caught wind of the spectacle, sending reporters with cameras and microphones, eager to document the conflict between a rebellious homeowner and a notoriously overbearing neighbor. Meanwhile, Karen was not idle. Within the first hour, she had contacted the HOA, demanding immediate action. She insisted that the inflatable violated every possible clause she could find: height restrictions, obstruction of view, safety hazards, and even aesthetic interference. The HOA responded in the usual bureaucratic fashion, sending a polite but vague notice to Mark, citing potential code violations and requesting immediate removal. But Mark remained calm, confident in his position. He had checked local ordinances, reviewed HOA bylaws, and documented everything meticulously. There was no legitimate violation, only the absurdity of an oversized inflatable monster placed as an act of resistance. By late morning, Karen had escalated matters further. She appeared outside with her phone, recording herself walking up Oak Ridge Lane. Neighbors watched as she gestured wildly toward the monster, muttering about fines and penalties that she claimed should be enforced. Some residents shook their heads. Others tried to hide their laughter behind carefully folded arms. In the background, Mark's lawn remained unchanged, the inflatable standing tall, undeterred by Karen's theatrics. Social media exploded. Clips of Karen pacing, gesturing, and shouting at the inflatable went viral. Hashtags like hashtag Monster vs. Karen and hashtag HOA Showdown trended locally, and soon the videos were being shared across platforms nationwide. People were captivated not just by the sheer absurdity of the situation, but by the clear symbolism. A lone homeowner had taken on the power of petty rules and relentless enforcement with creativity, humor, and a giant inflatable. The monster became more than just a yard decoration. It became a cultural moment, a symbol of resistance against overreach and bureaucracy. As the day wore on, reactions across the neighborhood became polarized. Some residents were inspired, secretly taking photos of their own yards and considering small acts of rebellion against the endless stringency of HOA rules. Others were horrified, worried that the conflict would escalate into fines, lawsuits, or even legal battles. A few sympathetic neighbors even brought over snacks and coffee, cheering Mark quietly from a safe distance, while others simply recorded and laughed, sharing clips online. Karen, however, was undeterred. She called the HOA again, demanding an emergency meeting. She sent texts, emails, and letters, each more frantic than the last. Her frustration grew as she realized that the monster was not just standing. It was thriving as a focal point of attention and admiration. Every time she posted a complaint online or shared photos of the inflatable, the response was overwhelmingly in Mark's favor. Comments flooded in. "This is the hero we need in every HOA." And Karen finally met her match. It was a surreal reversal of fortune. Her efforts to control, to dominate, to enforce petty rules had only amplified Mark's message to by evening. The monster had become a beacon. Its glowing eyes illuminated the yard, casting an eerie but playful light across Oak Lane. Neighbors gathered on porches and sidewalks, laughing, snapping pictures, and sharing updates online. Karen, exhausted and humiliated, retreated inside, plotting her next move. But even in private, she could not ignore the growing attention the monster had generated. Local news stations were calling. Social media influencers wanted live feeds. Memes were circulating. The inflatable was no longer just a statement, it was a full-blown viral phenomenon. Mark, on the other hand, felt vindicated. The months of fines, harassment, and petty tyranny had culminated in this moment of triumph. The inflatable monster was everything he had hoped it would be: absurd, defiant, and impossible to ignore. And most importantly, it had turned the tables on Karen and the overbearing HOA. He documented the unfolding chaos, capturing reactions from neighbors, footage of Karen's increasingly frantic attempts to assert control, and the steady stream of social media engagement. Each clip, each photo, each comment reinforced the point. Creativity and humor could topple bureaucracy and intimidation, if only for a moment. As night fell over Maplewood Heights, the inflatable monster glowed in all its glory, casting long shadows down the quiet street. The neighborhood had changed in subtle but undeniable ways. Conversations in yards and driveways now included whispers of rebellion and strategies to push back against unreasonable HOA enforcement. Residents who had once hidden their individuality behind muted gardens and compliant facades were now emboldened, inspired by Mark's audacity. But Karen was not finished. Retreating inside, plotting and strategizing, she began to consider the next phase of her response. The stage was set for an escalation unlike anything Maplewood Heights had ever seen. The monster had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. And as the glow of the inflatable lit the night, the sense of anticipation was palpable. The next day would bring new conflicts, new reactions, and a showdown that would push the neighborhood and the internet to the edge of its seat. The morning after the inflatable monster's dramatic debut, Oak Lane had transformed from a quiet suburban street into a buzzing spectacle. Word traveled fast, faster than anyone could have anticipated. Social media notifications lit up Mark Evans' phone incessantly. Videos, photos, and live streams from neighbors and passing strangers had gone viral overnight. The monster's enormous frame dominated every shot, its glowing eyes almost surreal against the morning light. Memes, hashtags, and commentary flooded the internet. Hashtag Monster vs. Karen, hashtag HOA versus Humanity, and hashtag Suburban Rebellion became trending topics. News outlets clamored for interviews, curious to cover the story of a lone homeowner taking on both the HOA and the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. Meanwhile, Karen Thompson's morning began with mounting frustration. From her kitchen window, she could see the monster still towering over her view, claws outstretched as if mocking her. The traffic on Oak Ridge Lane had increased exponentially, with neighbors, journalists, and even curious passersby pausing to snap photos and record videos. Karen had already contacted the HOA multiple times, demanding immediate action, but every attempt to remove the inflatable or secure compliance had failed. The HOA, wary of public backlash and the rapid spread of the viral content, moved cautiously, hesitant to appear draconian. Their initial polite notices now seemed powerless against the spectacle in Mark's yard. By midday, the street had become a living media event. News cameras rolled, drones hovered above, and neighbors gathered in clusters, phones raised to document every angle. Children ran through yards, laughing at the towering inflatable monster, while adults whispered excitedly about the audacity of Mark's statement. The entire neighborhood had transformed into an arena, the inflatable standing at its center as both spectacle and symbol. Karen attempted a new approach, deciding to confront the situation directly. She marched up the street, phone in hand, planning to capture footage for the HOA and to assert authority in real time. But every step she took, every gesture she made, was met with cameras, giggles, and the murmured commentary of dozens of witnesses. The spectacle had shifted in Mark's favor completely. What was once a tool for intimidation had become a viral symbol of defiance, turning the tables on the very neighbor who had sought to control the narrative. Mark, observing the chaos from his porch, remained calm. His plan had never been about confrontation in the conventional sense. It had been about creativity and strategy. The inflatable monster had done more than occupy his yard. It had shifted the dynamics of power, capturing attention, inspiring laughter, and creating a narrative that Karen could no longer control. Social media was on Mark's side, followers growing by the hour as clips were shared, memes were generated, and the hashtag #MonsterVSKaren spread across platforms. The internet reaction was extraordinary. Influencers shared clips, news outlets ran live coverage, and the story became a nationwide sensation. People everywhere related to the absurdity of HOA overreach, the relentless Karen-style complaints, and the ingenious way Mark had fought back. In forums, comment sections, and trending videos, viewers expressed admiration, disbelief, and amusement. Some offered advice for creating their own yard protests. Others simply laughed at the scale of the monster, marveling at the audacity and creativity that had turned a suburban feud into viral history. By late afternoon, the situation reached its peak. The local HOA finally attempted to step in physically, sending a representative to assess the inflatable and speak with Mark. But even their arrival couldn't diminish the spectacle. By now, dozens of neighbors, reporters, and online followers were present, filming and live-streaming. Mark greeted the representative politely, showing documentation proving that the monster did not violate any city codes or HOA regulations. Every attempt by the HOA to demand removal was met with careful explanation, legal references, and the mounting public attention that prevented them from taking drastic action. Karen's attempts to reclaim control grew more desperate. She issued online statements, filed complaints, and circulated photos claiming that the monster was intimidating and unsafe. Yet with each effort, the public reaction increasingly sided with Mark. The absurdity of her complaints, juxtaposed against the harmless yet theatrical nature of the inflatable, made her appear petty and unreasonable. By evening, it was clear that the power balance had shifted. The monster was no longer just an object in a yard. It had become a cultural moment, a symbol of resistance, humor, and the triumph of creativity over bureaucracy. As night fell, Mark activated the final feature of his plan. The inflatable's glowing eyes illuminated the street, flashing in synchronized patterns, creating a spectacle that was equal parts playful and theatrical. The neighborhood, once subdued under the weight of HOA rules and Karen's relentless policing, now erupted in laughter and celebration. Children cheered, neighbors applauded, and journalists captured every angle of the luminous monster dominating Oak Ridge Lane. The contrast was stark. A vibrant, creative defiance against an overly rigid, humorless attempt at control. Karen, defeated for the moment, retreated indoors, furious and humiliated. Her complaints now felt powerless, drowned out by viral memes, online coverage, and neighborhood commentary. Meanwhile, Mark watched from his porch, satisfied that his months of frustration, documentation, and planning had culminated in a public spectacle that transcended petty fines and neighborhood disputes. His victory wasn't just personal. It was public, viral, and irreversible. By the following morning, Maplewood Heights had changed forever. The inflatable monster remained standing, a reminder of one man's creativity, courage, and humor. Conversations in the neighborhood shifted from whispered complaints to strategies of expression, individuality, and standing up against unreasonable enforcement. Social media continued to amplify the story, turning Mark and his inflatable monster into icons of suburban rebellion. In the end, the monster had achieved what no letter, fine, or complaint ever could. It had captured attention, inspired laughter, and reminded an entire neighborhood and a nation watching online that creativity and determination could topple the most overbearing rules. Karen's reign of petty tyranny had been challenged in a way no one would forget, and Maplewood Heights would never be the same. The inflatable monster stood tall, glowing in the night, a playful yet triumphant guardian of individuality, humor, and resistance against absurd authority. And as long as it remained, Mark had proven one undeniable truth. Sometimes, the biggest monster in the yard is exactly what it takes to reclaim your power.